Good evening, welcome to Science on Tap. My name is Steven Reiner. I'm having a beer tonight with Stony Brook's very own Crocodile Dundee. He kept his hat. He's kind of a cross between Crocodile Dundee and Indiana Jones, but I don't want to embarrass him. He's really, in real life, 29-year-old Paul Gignac, who's an instructor of research in anatomy and a paleobiologist. Very, very fancy stuff. But to answer your number one question, he wrestles crocodiles. This is what he does. And he's here, he's lived to tell about it, and he's here to tell us about what it's like. But before he's going to tell us that, because I want to tease you a little bit with that, what I want to find out from Paul, because we all, in our childhoods, and many of us have children, and we've watched movies, and we'll watch cartoons, and there's something about alligators and crocodiles, Paul, that captures our imagination.
Absolutely.
What is it about those creatures that captivates us so much?
These are the last remaining big reptiles that we have, and so it harkens back to a time before any of us remember when there were big reptiles running around everywhere. And so these animals represent something to us that are accessible in the past because they're so large and they are so otherwise inaccessible to us. And we've been living with crocodilians our entire existence. The first caveman, an animal named Homo habilis, was bitten by a crocodile.
By the way, he is with us tonight.
It's true.
He's joined us. He's not going to have a beer because he can't handle the alcohol. But here he is, or at least a version of him.
We have a cast of the leg of this specimen, and we can see on it that there are very clear bite marks that are very indicative of a crocodile. And these probably belong to, these bites come from an animal that was recently named Crocodilus anthropophagus, which means crocodile, eater of man. So an appropriate name for an animal that would have done this. And so our entire history has been living with these animals. If we look at Chinese and Japanese dragons, these are almost caricatures of what crocodiles are. From the faces that they have to the way their jaws are shaped, even the right teeth are prominent in the right places. These are inspired by saltwater crocodiles. And in ancient history, we would find these fossil giant crocs, and Asian cultures would think these were big dragons. They were finding the bones of these large animals. And even into modern times, we are still captivated by crocodiles and alligators. Just look on Swamp People or the Gator Boys shows. We're still engaging with these animals in an unprecedented way, and that includes a lot of our conservation efforts. And the reason why so many of you are here tonight is that they are a charismatic group of animals, and so they lead us into asking, how do they make a living? What are their lifestyles like? And
now we name a football bowl after them, and we name football teams after them, and we make them mascots of elementary schools, high schools, colleges. But there's crocodiles and there's alligators. So just for the record, what's the difference between a crocodile and an alligator?
Crocodiles and alligators are cousins, but the major difference is that alligators have an overbite, and so you don't see their lower teeth.
So for those of you here from the dental school, there's orthodontia needed for alligators.
Absolutely.
All right.
And crocodiles don't. And so you can see their lower teeth protruding out next to their upper teeth.
And crocodiles are a bit stronger, but we're going to get to that a little later.
They're more aggressive in general.
Okay, but crocodiles, aside from being around not as long as man, but longer than man, the first animal likely to seriously bite man, they are fascinating, unique creatures.
They are.
Tell us about some things that make them truly unique in the animal kingdom.
So these animals go through an explosive growth phase. When we think of big animals, we think of something iconic like a blue whale. Well, a blue whale is birthed at 5,000 pounds and can reach 30,000 pounds. And that's enormous, but that's a 60-fold increase in size. Alligators and crocodiles go through a 5,000 to 7,000-fold increase in size. When they hatch, they're about 10 inches long, and they can reach 14 feet long. And so that's going from something like 3/4 of a pound to 775 pounds.
That's a growth spurt.
is an enormous growth spurt. It is among the highest growth spurts of any animal that's alive today. And so understanding what happens during this growth spurt is important for understanding how biology and evolution has taken growth and tried to use it as a way to access new food resources or prey, reproductive resources or new habitats.
Now, I described you at the very beginning as a paleobiologist, which is a hybrid. So we're familiar with paleontologists, we're familiar with biologists. What does it mean to be both? What's the difference between paleontology and biology, and what does it mean to be a hybrid?
So historically, paleontologists were trained by geologists. This was a purview of geology programs, and for more than a century, everything we knew about fossil organisms came from geology-based research. And this led us down a path of thinking that dinosaurs, for example, were dumb-witted, tail-dragging, lizard-like animals. And it wasn't until about the 1970s when we began taking a biological approach to understanding fossil organisms that we began to really uncover how these animals lived. And so the combination of being a biologist who focuses on paleontological questions that uses fossils to understand the evolution of groups is this meshing of paleobiologist. And so now we have researchers who are biologically trained, and they're going out and looking at lots of fossil organisms and trying to understand how they lived in a biological context.
So what's the big change in our understanding about dinosaurs to begin with? You said, first of all, they're not these slithery creatures that we initially thought. Many of us went to the Museum of Natural History and we saw those big skeletons, and what's the other change?
We now know that they had a much faster lifestyle than we used to think. They were often portrayed as big and lumbering, but we know now that they had these body forms that acted like seesaws so that they could run fast and their heads and tails would balance each other out. We know that they were feathered, and they probably looked a lot like modern birds today. So they would be really colorful. That probably meant they had active lifestyles. And it has led to a renaissance in our understanding of the way that these animals interacted with each other and how they led to what are the modern dinosaurs, birds, which is the most species-rich group of animals living on land with 10,000 species. And so dinosaurs today represent most of what we know of as living vertebrates, living terrestrial vertebrates.
So a dinosaur, a bird, and a crocodile walk into a bar, which is the beginning of a joke we don't have the answer to, but what do they have in common?
They have a number of things that would actually surprise you. So for a long time, it was thought that a number of features that birds had were just very bird-specific. So for example, they have a one-way airflow system in their lungs. We breathe in, we pool the air that we breathe in with the CO2 that our body is getting rid of, and then we breathe all of that out. It's really inefficient. We're actually really terrible at breathing. Birds, on the other hand, breathe in, and all that fresh air never mixes with the dirty air, which is breathed out at the same time. And so they have a really efficient lung capacity. Turns out crocodiles have the exact same kind of lung system. Well, they don't fly. And so we think that this ability, this physiology and lung system they have, evolved really early on, so that both groups, which are related to each other, carried that on from their common ancestor. So that would mean dinosaurs would also have had this same kind of lung system.
And birds, dinosaurs, and crocodiles also have something in common with the flat-screen TVs here.
They do. They have high-def vision. It's true. It turns out that the cells that make up the retinas of the eyes of these animals are really dense. They're far more dense than ours, and so they're able to see a greater range of pixels, if you will. We have standard definition displays, and they have high definition displays.
And they can see in 3D without the glasses.
Without the glasses, that's right.
Not all the time, but some of the time.
Yes.
Right. But still, we seem to be more fascinated with dinosaurs.
We do.
We seem to be more fascinated with dinosaurs. After all, Steven Spielberg didn't make a big movie about crocodiles. Michael Crichton didn't write a book about crocodiles. Why don't crocodiles get no respect?
Well, they should have made a movie about crocodiles, and there should be big books about crocodiles.
Now, crocodiles, aside from having this tremendous growth spurt, they're also quite fragile when they start out. There's not a great track record for survival.
It's remarkable. So to go through this 5,000 to 7,000 fold increase in body size, you have to live a rough lifestyle. So say 1,000 hatchling alligators are born in a year, 800 of them will be dead after the first year. There's an 80% mortality because these animals are competing for food resources, they're being cannibalized by other alligators and crocodiles, they're prey to birds and other mammals.
So after the first year, only 20% survive.
Only 20% are left. And that's pretty stable for the next, say, 9 years or so. And then they reach sexual maturity, and they start competing for access to mates. And at that point, half again die off. And so we're left with about 10% of the population that are about 10 feet or longer. And among those, only about 5% actually continuously produce more offspring. So if you are a big alligator or crocodile, you represent the best of your cohort, and you're the one that's producing the next generation of alligators and crocodiles.
Which, of course, is another example of size matters, even in the crocodile world. Remember.
Especially in the crocodile world.
Especially in the crocodile
That's
world.
right.
Especially in the crocodile world. Now, crocodiles also have other unique attributes. Tell us about some other ones.
These are animals that have some of the highest bite forces that have ever been recorded for any animals.
Excuse me, and once again, they don't get no respect. Steven Spielberg made his reputation on, we know what the movie is, Jaws. We get a lot of publicity about the horror of a shark bite. What is the strength of a shark, the closing jaw of a shark bite?
Would anybody like to guess? What do you think the strength of a shark bite is?
We're all afraid of that, Jaws.
10 pounds? 10 to 1. 10 to 1 compared to the alligator, so it's 10 times more forceful. 10 times
10
less.
times less.
Oh, that's actually quite right. They're about 300 pounds, which is fairly unimpressive when you compare it to an alligator, which is 3,000 pounds.
So how do you make that concrete? What does that mean, 3,000 pounds?
So I drive a Mini Cooper. If you put that Mini Cooper on your leg, it's like being in the jaws of an American alligator. And
a little part of your leg.
A little part of your leg, and all of that force is being applied over the area about the size of a quarter. So it can do a lot of damage. And that's not even the top. The saltwater crocodile can generate 4,000 pounds of bite force. So these are 20-foot-long animals alive today that are generating just enormous bite forces.
Now, the unique thing about, or the interesting thing about a crocodile's bite force is that it's a one-way bite force in terms of the amazing strength.
Right.
So even I might be able to pry one open.
No, you'd be able to hold it closed.
I'd be able to hold it closed.
Unless you can bench press 3,000 pounds.
I can't do that. Okay. So to pry it open, tough. To keep it shut.
Not so tough. Until they're about 12 feet long. And they have one muscle that opens their jaws. And in a large animal, it's about the size of a man's bicep. So you're really challenging your hands at about a 12-foot-long animal to be able to hold that jaw shut. But anything else, you'd be fine.
So in animal shows or carnival shows, if you have someone who's holding the jaw shut, that's a feat, but not as impressive as many people might think it was.
No.
Now, we talked about at the beginning that you wrestle these things. I shouldn't say these things, these noble creatures.
These noble creatures, that's right.
First of all, why?
That's a very fair question. So because these animals go through such a large growth spurt, they are a way to access some of the fundamental questions in biology that we otherwise haven't really been able to get at. And these go back to even questions that Darwin posited on the origin of species. And that is—
By the way, posited, that's a word that scientists use. We don't use it in conversation. Posited, tell us what posited means.
Darwin asked, how do you get big?
Asked, okay.
How do you get big? You are a very small animal. You go through this enormous size increase. How do you accommodate that as you grow? How do you get through growing pains? How do you start feeding on new food resources, which is where I focus on? But we really don't understand how animals grow, and this represents the extreme example among living animals about how they grow. And so they are a great window into trying to understand how growth affects the lifestyles that they live, and therefore how evolution may be tweaking the way that growth affects the lifestyles that they live.
Well, since we're talking about growth right now, and I know we maybe didn't plan to talk about it right at this juncture, but we are going to under embargo. We have a bunch of journalists here, and what embargo means is that this is really not going to be made public for a while. But if it's okay with you,
Sure.
Paul is going to be making some news, breaking some news in the world of paleontology and biology in a couple of weeks. It was recently reported that
You may have seen in the science section of the New York Times or your favorite science publication that they've just discovered the bite force for Tyrannosaurus rex. Right, you should be impressed. It's Tyrannosaurus rex. And it's thought that this animal had a bite force of about 12,000 pounds. All right, so that's taking a Mack truck. That's just the trailer part of the Mack truck. That's impressive. But it's not as impressive as fossil crocodiles. We have a specimen that we've been working on. Its name is Deinosuchus, which means the Terror Croc. So we have the tyrant lizard king versus the Terror Croc here. And it's a 39-foot-long fossil crocodile that we estimate generated 23,000 pounds of bite force. That's taking the Mack truck and putting it on your leg, not the Mini Cooper. And so this is by far the highest bite force that anyone has ever been able to calculate for a living or a fossil animal.
so this is a creature that could take down the Tyrannosaurus rex.
It could take down the
And it probably
Tyrannosaurus
did.
rex. And I'm willing to say that it probably did.
So there are those who say, okay, the age of the dinosaur, schminosaur, it really was the age of the crocodile.
And it turns out that if you come to scientific meetings with a lot of croc biologists, they are now referring to it as the age of the crocodile.
Okay, so again, this is a creature that may spawn many new horror movies.
Absolutely.
We have no idea, right? It's also a creature that tells us a lot about not only where we've been, but where we're going.
Quite
As a
possibly.
species and as an entire system of creatures.
That's right.
What can we begin to learn about that?
So because these animals go through such a large body size increase during their growth, there should be generalizations to the way that animals grow that we can then work back to other animals, including ourselves and our ancestors. So by understanding the evolution of growth and what I focus on is performance. So bite force is a performance capacity, like having a 4-second sprint is a performance capacity. Understanding how that's evolved should allow us to generalize about the way performance changes on a big evolutionary scale. And our own history has involved moving from a four-legged to a two-legged kind of gait where we now walk upright. And that includes a change in the muscles and the bones that went along with locomotion. And while that's a completely different system, generalizations that we can draw from the way that muscle bone systems in, say, a croc that goes through this big body size change, they might be applicable to
So
understanding our
how do you
ancestry.
study this over an enormous period of time? Which is what you're doing. You don't have an enormous period of time to do
No.
it. You have your professional life.
That's right.
But you're trying to look at this over millennia.
It's true. And so what we've done is we've not only estimated bite forces for big fossil crocs, but we've measured them in every living species. There's 23 living crocodile, alligator, caiman, and gharial species. And
What kind of species?
Gharial.
What does that mean?
It's an Indian croc that has a very long, slender snout with a big sort of bulb on
So
the
there are
end.
many different kinds of crocs.
There's many different kinds of crocs.
Okay.
And by understanding how all of them perform in this way, we can then look at how they're related and track back the evolution of performance. And this is a clade that goes back tens of millions of years among those that are living now. And that gives us a window into the past of how they've been able to evolve to have the performance kind of capacities that they do.
But why do humans want this window into the past, aside from, of course, the intellectual, academic interest in this?
Well, those are always great reasons in and
Of course.
themselves.
I don't mean to disparage those.
But it turns out that crocs may be a great indicator for issues of global warming. And so these are animals that rely on temperature, in particularly.
So global warming, another one of those liberal myths.
It should actually be global climate change.
Global climate change. Okay. So and the warming of the planet, and this is not the first time we may have planetary warming
No,
going on.
not at all.
Something we didn't talk about before has a significant impact on this particular species.
Right. So while we have X and Y chromosomes that differentiate males and females, Alligators and crocodiles do it all by temperature. So in the nest at 89 degrees Fahrenheit, any egg that's in that layer will be male, and anything that's above or below it will be female. And so if there are changes in global temperatures, it's possible that clutches will hatch all one sex.
So the male only develops at one temperature.
Plus or minus 1 degree in either direction.
Significant, anything 2 degrees above or 2 degrees below.
We get females.
So once again, another example of male being the more fragile species. Sex,
perhaps,
right.
perhaps.
Okay. So male crocodiles are potentially in danger.
Potentially.
What would the world do without male crocodiles?
I don't know. I would be sad. I imagine a lot of people here would be sad as well.
Okay.
The flip side of this is that, say, 20 million years ago, we went through a big warming period. So in Germany right now, in Strasbourg, the average temperature is about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. 20 million years ago, it was 65 degrees Fahrenheit. It was much warmer back then. And we have crocodiles and alligators that made it all the way up to southern Germany 20 million years ago. And this was a period where they really diversified. So we know that when the temperature warms, they become more species rich. But what we don't know is if the species die because...
So how far north have they...
They get about as far north as Arkansas in the U.S.
Right, but in terms of Germany, how far north have they gone?
They're still only between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn.
Okay,
so
I'm just figuring out how long
degrees.
it's going to take for them to get to Stony Brook from Arkansas, when crocodiles will begin to roam the campus.
I bring them up usually every year to do research, so if you're not careful, you might run into one on campus.
Which then recalls one of the great urban myths of crocodiles in the sewers, which we can talk about, sewers in New York City,
That's right.
which we can talk about a little bit later. But I want to go back just to the wrestling part of this, because I want you to take us into the field with you.
Okay.
And you're not wrestling them for sport. You're not putting on a show. So, and I know it's not literally a wrestle, but you've got to handle them in order to study them. And you've got to know them in order to handle them, because I don't see any big, horrible bite marks on you.
I still have all my fingers.
And if you can look at some of the things that are sitting in front of us that maybe the camera will grab for us, you can see they got some mean teeth.
They absolutely
And we know
have
about
mean
the bite
teeth.
force.
That's right. So we work with obviously dangerous animals, but we do it in the most constrained conditions that we can. So that it's like being a high-rise construction worker. You do the same thing the same way every day, and you don't get hurt. And so we have a team that I work with that has a lot of experience handling these animals. We work with zoos that have lots of crocodilians and other crocodile and alligator researchers. And so what we're interested in is understanding the way that bite forces change, both developmentally and evolutionarily. So we have to capture these animals. We'll often work with local trappers. When I was in Florida, we would work with people who were capturing alligators that were in backyards, that were harassing dogs, and in residential areas. The state of Florida licenses people to go get these alligators, and so we'd work with them in order to access the animals. And we have what's essentially a really expensive bathroom scale that we put in their mouth, and they bite down on that, and that tells us how much force they generate.
And when we were talking about, one of the legendary crocodile handlers, aside from the fictitious one, Crocodile Dundee, Steve Earle, who died not at the jaws of a crocodile, but through an animal with which he was not that familiar, which is...
So Steve Irwin died from a stingray barb that was entered into his heart, essentially. And he was probably never going to be that injured by an alligator or crocodile.
Because he knew
them
the
extremely
signs.
well. And so once you become familiar with these animals, it turns out that they move in very predictable ways. All of their major body muscles run down the side, and so if they want to move to the left, the tip of their tail moves to the left first, and then the whole body moves, and to the right, the same thing.
So you can read them.
You can read them pretty easily. In his case, it was an animal he wasn't familiar with, and he hadn't taken the time to learn those cues that when an animal's in distress, it tends to exhibit before it does something unexpected.
What is the level of intelligence of these creatures?
You'd be surprised to know that they can actually, like lab rats, push a lever to get food when a certain color light appears. This is brand new research out of Louisiana a couple of years ago. Somebody was trying to train alligators just to see if you could train alligators. And it turns out you can train alligators. They're not big dumb brutes, they have both in their behavior and in experiments people have done, sort of a surprising level of sophistication.
So alligators have feelings too?
Alligators have feelings
Really?
too.
We've heard about species becoming endangered. We know about, these are creatures that are used for hides, for expensive handbags, for expensive belts. What is the status right now in terms of the population in this country and globally? Are they endangered? Are they plentiful? Is this a concern?
It's a big concern. 17 of the 23 species are listed as endangered or probably ready to go extinct. And in the US, we've done a really great job of bringing them back from the brink of extinction. So much so that we need to hire trappers in Florida, for example, to contain animals that are moving into residential areas. There have been major pushes in the last 45 years to bring these animals back from the brink of extinction. And so there are lots of rehabilitation centers. No one is allowed to hunt alligators below a certain total length. And so we have been so successful that this year the state of Florida legislature is considering relaxing some of the laws on hunting alligators in order to sort of, like we do with deer in Vermont, cull the population somewhat.
So far it's been a success story.
Can I get you anything?
I would love another beer. Thank you very much.
All
Getting
right,
a little
what
warm.
about you?
I'd love another beer.
So
as
we're going to
well.
take a little break right now, and we're going to hear Ray and the band a little bit more, and we'll be back in a little while.